witchlings, welcome back to my channel. It's me, your local chaotic witch aunt. And today we are talking about graveyard and cemetery etiquette. Woo! This is definitely a video that people have been asking for since the conception of my channel, which is like two years now. I think I started my channel in 2021. I do have notes on my notes app on my phone because graveyard etiquette is like a huge topic. Graveyard etiquette encompasses multiple kind of facets of entering a cemetery or graveyard. One of those tends to be, you know, the rules that the graveyard and the cemetery already have in place for visitors. And then there's of course like spiritual rules and then stuff that I do personally that I will be including. To kind of start us off, there is a difference between a graveyard and a cemetery. A cemetery is not necessarily attached to a church, but it's still where people are buried. You can find particular cemeteries that are Jewish, Catholic, non-denominational, all of the above. A graveyard is attached to a church. So that's kind of the difference between the two. A lot of times people are talking about graveyards, but they are actually referring to cemeteries because it's not attached to a church. There isn't a church right there with like church things. In my opinion, graveyards have a different vibe than cemeteries, and it's one of those things that you'll feel if you go to a cemetery versus a graveyard. But at the same time, I'm more of a cemetery person. I like going to cemeteries more than I go to graveyards, just because sometimes graveyards they're a little meaner, maybe a little harsher, depends. I am not in this video going to be going through specific denominations of different types of cemeteries, but I will note kind of right now that if you are not of that denomination in the church, let's say you go to let's say you go to a Jewish cemetery, which isn't a denomination, that's a religion, but let's say you go to a Jewish cemetery. If you're not Jewish, I would not recommend taking anything from that cemetery because why would you do that? And if you really are invested in taking something from a Jewish cemetery when you're not Jewish, you should talk to a Jewish person about cemetery rules. One of which is don't touch the rocks. Thank you, shout out Jew witches for giving me that piece of information. Don't touch the rocks. Now, taking things from a cemetery versus going and visiting the cemetery are two different things. To my knowledge, when I think of cemeteries, a lot of cemeteries have their own rules. Same with graveyards about when you can enter, what you can do while entering, etc. And a lot of those include no going in after hours or after the gates close. It's very typical of cemeteries to close their gates at dusk, at least the ones that I've been to, and then reopen them the next night. Keep dogs on leash. Don't leave trash or plastic offerings. That is specific to a few cemeteries. The one that is near me now does not have that rule. Like plastic offerings, like flowers, are okay. They just say that if you leave an offering on a gravestone or something on the gravestone, the people taking care of the cemetery have the right to remove it whenever they feel it's becoming a problem. Don't trespass on burial plots or walk over gravestones. This one is also one that is specific to certain cemeteries. I would say it's a good rule of thumb to be respectful about the graves in the cemetery. You don't want to necessarily go in and just start stepping on burial plots. And there's a difference between like trying to walk somewhere and accidentally stepping on a gravestone and purposefully only walking on gravestones. There are usually paths to walk on in cemeteries, and unless you have a specific purpose for getting off, I recommend trying your best to stay on the trails. Another one is don't disturb mourners. This is something that I have found is pretty present in a lot of different cemeteries. If someone is there mourning, if there is a funeral, do not disturb them. It's just disrespectful. You are there at a cemetery, whether you're there for a walk, you're there for a spiritual working, you're there for just to spend time in the cemetery. Don't disturb mourners. I have not gone to a cemetery and had like a funeral present. There are like fresh graves or people visiting a grave of someone who passed recently, but typically when I go to cemeteries, I don't run into funerals, but that isn't the case for everyone. Let me see if there are other ones. Oh yeah. Please do not climb, lean against, or touch monuments. This is specific to my old graveyard that I visited. They are 100 years old, the monuments there, so do not. Please be respectful and keep in mind that the cemeteries are final sites of rest. That's a big one. Even if I don't talk about a specific rule that a cemetery has, always check the rules before entering. Remember that this is a place where people are laid to rest, and being respectful is of the utmost importance. They do have, a lot of places do have flower regulations, which is like flowers can be placed there, but they have to look nice. There are a lot of other things too. The big vibe is respect. A lot of ones will not allow unauthorized plantings of anything. There are certain cemeteries too that I took a class with J. Allen Cross a while ago, a graveyard etiquette. And if you're doing like a candle, I typically recommend not using a real candle. If you're gonna use a real candle, stay there with it while it's burning. This is something that I think about a lot in Colorado, because in Colorado, everything is a fire hazard and everything can light on fire. Everything's really, really dry. It's really, really arid here. So if you leave a flame unattended, especially outside, it's very easy for it to light debris on fire and start a brand new fire. Even if it's not typically in fire season, this is still an issue that could happen. I didn't think about this as much in Pennsylvania because everything was always kind of wet and humid. So there was less of a chance of something catching on fire and starting a forest fire, basically. I think that fake candles are perfectly fine to use in spell work. If you want to, sometimes I know the graveyard near me has water left behind. There's one that I visited a while ago that one of the gravestones has like coins, a fork and knife, food offerings on it. So it really depends on the grave you're visiting and what you're visiting the grave for and the rules about the cemetery. If you are going to like a family's gravestone and you light a candle and you sit there with it, yeah. We'll talk about spell work a little later too. A lot of people are there for different reasons when you're in the cemetery, which I kind of touched on when we're talking about mourners. At the end of the day, a lot of people are in cemeteries because they are mourning someone who has passed away. And being respectful of that is of the utmost importance. Before any type of, I want to hang out in the cemetery because it's calm, I want to do spiritual workings, before any of that, you need to think through and evaluate your behavior in cemeteries. Are you going in and littering, which by the way, another thing you shouldn't do? Are you going in and being noisy? Are you going there and being respectful, or are you going in and doing things that are disrespectful? I say this too, in a metaphysical, spiritual sense, if you're going into a cemetery or a graveyard for a spiritual reason, and you don't already have an established repertoire of being respectful, no one's gonna help you. No one there wants to deal with you. And I mean this physically, spiritually. Where's my light? Damn it. A lot of times I'll go and clean up gravestones or pick up litter, but I don't necessarily go to cemeteries with the sole purpose of spiritual or metaphysical planning. And I'm gonna say this, here are more metaphysical rules of cemeteries and graveyards. These are a mix of kind of ones that I found from other practitioners, ones that have been talked about in classes, and ones that I personally have used. 1, do not take anything the first time you visit. I don't care if you're I need graveyard dirt, I'm gonna go to the cemetery, I need a stone, I'm going to the cemetery. Do not take it the first time you go. If this is your first time in the cemetery and you walk in and you take something, what makes you think that anyone there is gonna be happy about it? It's like walking into someone's bedroom and taking some of their sheets and then leaving. It's not a vibe. That is my rule of thumb. If you are looking for spiritual workings with graveyards or cemeteries, the number one thing is to establish a relationship with not only the spirits in the cemetery, the dog moved the camera, but also the cemetery itself. I always try to leave something at the entrance of a cemetery as a thank you for letting me enter. I frequently will visit non-denominational Christian cemeteries and I leave coins. If you happen to go to a Jewish cemetery, do not leave a coin. just don't. It's just, that's in bad taste. Don't do that. And that is from also Jewishes. We had a conversation about cemetery etiquette. I'm like, what would you consider okay? And they're like, well, don't like take any rocks and don't leave any coins. And I'm like, okay, cool. But also I'm not Jewish, so if you are Jewish and you know etiquette of Jewish cemeteries a lot better than me, drop it in the comments, please. I didn't plan to go through a whole like Jewish cemetery etiquette. I'm speaking more to cemeteries that are non-denominational Christian. There's like a Masonic cemetery nearby here. They have a whole Freemason section. And I'm like, that's kind of cool, but I've never seen that. Apparently the Freemasons are big in Colorado, as are cannibals. There's only one that I've seen in there. But like, when I was in Pennsylvania, when you went to the cemetery, you got like Civil War soldiers that fought on the side of ending slavery. You got like really, really old people who were like part of the government. And then you come here and it's like, here's the Colorado cannibal and also Freemasons. And I'm like, okay. So the vibes, like, depending on where you are, cemeteries are gonna have very different vibes. If you are in the middle of nowhere, you may just have a bunch of random people from your small town there. If you are somewhere like that has a lot of history or historical meaning, like in Colorado, there are a lot of gravestones having to do with people who like are founded towns. And that's like a big thing here. Versus in Pennsylvania, a lot of Civil War soldiers, because that was happening right there. And a lot of them died there. I already talked about this, but some cemeteries are okay with candles being left. Others are not, but fake candles are always useful. I am not personally comfortable with leaving lit candles in a cemetery. Depending on your tradition, on your culture, on the cemetery nearby, on your family, you may be perfectly comfortable and it may be perfectly normal for you to leave a candle in the graveyard, and it's okay. Where I am, graveyards, the cemeteries are like mostly grass with graves and trees and dead brush. And I think there's one I want to say that there's one in Los Angeles that is like all stone, where there are pavement and then graves. That's completely different when you light a candle there than it is here. So like I said, totally depends on it. There are definitely traditions and cultures that light candles and leave them on graves for loved ones. Do it. I'm not here to tell you not to do it. I'm saying I personally am not comfortable with it, primarily because of where I live. I will start a forest fire. I always like to learn the cemetery's history and some of its occupants before entering. If I'm going in and I want to know anything about the cemetery, I'll spend a little time researching when I get back home, or I'll do it beforehand. Before you're entering, and now we're kind of getting into like protection stuff, before you are entering a space, and because you are entering a space inhabited by spirits, I always take protective measures. For me, that looks like covering my head and wearing a veil, wearing protective jewelry, carrying something that's enchanted with protection. You can take a ritual bath before and after. You can cleanse before and after. Depending on the cemetery, you don't know if something's gonna follow you home. They are very spiritually active places. I also do this thing where I spend three times entering the cemetery and upon leaving and before I enter my house. This was like, I don't even know where I found this, but I've just been doing it for so long that I just stopped doing it. It's like a superstition. You spend 3 times and the ghost won't follow you. Add it on with protection measures, it's great. Some cemeteries and graveyards are more active and some are less active. Totally depends on the cemetery. I'm not gonna go too in depth into spiritual workings in graveyards in this video personally, because I feel I don't do a lot of it. Like, I really don't. And I think that if you're watching a video on graveyard etiquette and then you immediately hop into trying to do a spiritual working, you should slow down. You need to slow down. I think the book We're Utterly Wicked by Dorothy Morrison really goes in depth with like graveyard etiquette in regards to spiritual workings, including graveyard dirt, etc. Because of my folk practice and the tradition that I am in and what I learn, I am not in the type of folk practice that is going to take something from a graveyard or cemetery to use in magic. There's only one spell that I found that is like a cemetery stone, and that's it. And even then, I haven't done that because I'm lazy. It is a lot of work to enter a cemetery or graveyard and acquaint yourself with all of the spirits there, and then look through all the spirits, and then take graveyard dirt from someone's grave. I typically recommend not doing it to someone you don't know and someone buried recently. That there's a kind of, I believe it's an Italian folk belief that it takes, after people pass away, it takes a year before you can call them in for like ancestor work and spiritual workings. So if someone was buried within the past year, don't touch their grave. Don't touch it. And if you don't know them, don't touch it. The type of graves that a lot of people, when you work with graveyard dirt, when you look into graveyard dirt, you are taking it from a specific grave for a specific purpose, because that spirit has an association of, like, they were a soldier, they can help with protection. They were a murderer, they can help with hexing. But that takes a lot of research and a lot of working through whether the cemetery is the right place to conduct that kind of practice. That goes through looking at how old the cemetery is. I personally kind of go to really old gravestones for this kind of stuff. I don't tend to, like, if they died 20 years ago, I'm not gonna disturb them. I'm like, all right, have a good day. And these are my personal preferences when it comes to spiritual work. Like I said, I don't do a lot of it, and because of that, I'm not going to give you a how-to guide. I'm just telling you how to approach cemeteries and graveyards as a spiritual practitioner and as someone who is looking to be respectful of the graveyard and the cemetery. Taking protective measures, being respectful, and not going in just to grab some graveyard dirt and leave without forming a relationship. That's kind of my, that's graveyard etiquette for me. And of course, there are more practitioners that are going to be doing more with the graveyard than I am. But personally, I tend to go there to relax. I go there when I'm like, I need quiet. I go, I sit with the graves, I read, and then I go home. It's comforting to me, and because of that, I tend to do comforting things. I may have a picnic, I may sit and read, I may take a walk. I typically don't go to graveyards or cemeteries specifically for spiritual purposes, and I haven't done a spell in a really long time that has required graveyard dirt or something from a cemetery, like cemetery dirt. Also, when people talk about graveyard dirt, they do mean the type of grave attached to a church versus cemetery dirt. I know a lot of people group them together, but I feel like those specifications are really important when you get down into this kind of stuff. But yeah, if you have add-ons for me talking about cemetery and graveyard etiquette, or you have experience working spells in a cemetery or graveyard, respectfully, please drop it down in the comments below. I'm very excited to hear about it. Thank you so much for watching. I'm glad to be back with my witchy content. If you want to catch up with my NaNoWriMo vlogs, you can look here or here. Remember to drink water and have an amazing rest of your day. Siate benedetti.